neighbor. Don't you like that music? It's just kind of like a lay on the floor and relax kind of music. It's just laid back. We're glad you're here. If you're new, we're doing a series on what it means to be a neighbor, as in followers of Jesus, how we should reach out to the people around us. And we've been gone. We just got back. Gina and I and a team from here just got back from a missions trip, and it was fabulous. Thank you for praying for us. We went to the beautiful country of Indonesia and worked with several of our churches there, and they're doing a great job in very difficult circumstances and trying times, but our churches are doing well. We ate a lot of extremely bizarre food that I never had in my bucket list to eat, but we ate it and survived, so thank you for praying for us with that too. The churches are doing well. We also then went to New Zealand, and we have Harvester has a church plant there, and Hamish and Molly Taylor and Nate and Whitney Hutchison are leading that church and doing real well in this country that's, again, absolutely beautiful, gorgeous, but it's kind of a post-Christian moving on past God in so many ways. It's hard to believe when there's so much beauty that people could walk away from God, but we do that. But the church plant is doing well. So continue to pray for the work that's doing there, as well as other churches around the country that we partner with. Nokomis has shared the last couple weeks about being a neighbor. The first week he challenged you, just do you even know who your neighbor is? And so I encourage you to go find their names, connect with them, reach out to them. And then last week, it was on love your neighbor. And he challenged you to do something kind towards someone, sharing something with them, doing something good, baking cookies, whatever. So I want to ask you, how many of you did your assignment and you did something kind intentionally for a neighbor? Oh, class. I need to have him come up and repeat that sermon, I think, huh? Okay, well, we got this week still to do it. Think about, what is it that you can do intentionally kind for a neighbor? I like the reference we're using is the neighbor literally around you where you live. But also think about the neighbor at your work, the cubicles that are all around you, the people that stand close to you. How are you doing reaching out to them? Or maybe it's the lockers next to you in school, the people down the row, those odd, weird people that are your neighbors that you interact with every day, but we just kind of avoid. How can we intentionally reach out to them? And today we want to continue as we look at our neighbor and what is it that God called us to. We'll take a look at an example of how Jesus reached out to people who were different, but as he's walking through their neighborhood. So go to John chapter 4, beginning at verse number 4. See this story about Jesus. It said, now Jesus had to go through Samaria. So he chose to walk through this land. It says, so he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of the ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. So just kind of give a little perspective. If you think of the country of Israel, this is right in the middle. He's in the north heading south, and some of you are involved in getting ready for our journey to Bethlehem. You know the lines that the Jews avoided this area. They would go all the way around it, walk many miles out of the way, because the people living in Samaria were a different race. They were a different religion. They practiced their faith differently, and they didn't want to have anything to do with people who were different from them. So they avoided them. But Jesus, he just walks right through the heart of it, reaches out. It's kind of interesting when it tells you that this area is where Joseph was, Jacob and Joseph. We just finished our series on Joseph. So if you go there, this is the area where Joseph went and saw his brothers, where he was sold into slavery. He's back in that same area. And also there is a well. This well is called Jacob's well that Jesus came to. And if you go to Sychar today, or Shechem, it's also now called Nablus. If you go to Nablus, you go right to the heart of the ancient city, and there is a church. Inside the church is a well. And this is Jacob's well. So it's fun to go and see this well that we know Jacob built, but we also know that Jesus went to it and he sat down and had this conversation we're about to read about. Continue on. Let's go down to verse 9. He met a lady. He began talking to her. And it says, verse 9, the Samaritan woman said to Jesus, you are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. She said, I am different from you. You avoid people like me. But Jesus reached out to her And we see, you know much about Jesus, you see that he was able to look past differences and see the person. And as a follower of Jesus, we need to be the same. That you see people who are very different from you. And this lady was different. She was in Samaria, a different area, who said she was a different race. She was a different religion. She worshiped differently. And also, she had some very difficult things in her life. She was one of those that was separated, put off to the side. If you were to go to that very well in the morning, everybody was hanging out there. It'd be like going to Starbucks in the morning. Everybody just kind of goes. It's the gathering place. You get your water for the day, but it's also the community. You gossip, you talk about everything going on, what's that thing's like. So you go there in the morning, but she was not there in the morning. She came late in the afternoon, and she was by herself because she was a cast off from the society. She was in a different place. You know, in any neighborhood, you've got the people that hang around the Starbucks, you got the accepted people, you got the people that are doing well, and then you always have that different person, the person who stands off to the side. Some of you remember the Mr. Rogers show. You go there, you have Daniel Tiger, and Daniel is a good guy. Everybody loves Daniel Tiger. And then there's Henrietta Pussycat, who says, "There, come on, you can do better than that. Yeah, meow, 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 meow." That's Henrietta Pussycat, she's nice. And then you got important people like King Friday and Sarah Saturday, and people like them because they're someone important. You want to hang around them, but you're a little bit nervous around them. And then you have those other people. Do you remember Lady Elaine Fairchild? She's a scary lady. You know, she just kind of not the most attractive. And it's kind of odd. She was a curator for the Merry-Go-Round Museum, and she's there. She's got all kinds of odd things about her personality, and she was mean. She would just do these things, like she'd say boomerang, toomerang, sumerang, you know, and people get all nervous around her, and you just think, she's just odd. She's just weird, and I always think, why don't they just take her out of this show? I didn't like it when Lady Elaine came on the show. Just get rid of that puppet. It's just not a very nice one. And perhaps you have someone in your neighborhood like Lady Elaine Fairchild that you think, I'd really wish they would just move away. You know, they go to your neighborhood, sit in my neighborhood. You know, just that odd person. If you don't have that person in your neighborhood, then maybe you're that person, you know. But you have those Lady Fairchilds who are just different. Now, if you know much about that show, over the time, you find out, oh, she has this issue, and she has this issue, and this happened to her in the past. She's a unique person, but I think it's unique that they kept her in there to remind you that in every neighborhood, there's those difficult people that sometimes we'd wish they'd move away, but they didn't. And of course, in the perfect land of Mr. Rogers, everybody was kind to her, always kind to her, which is sometimes different than how we are. When you see people that are so different, how do we respond to them? We'll see how Jesus responded to this lady. Then in verse 17, he begins this conversation. He talks to her. He asks her a direct question, and she says, "I have no husband," she replied. And Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have said is quite true." So this lady had a lot of heartache. Now, people could label her. People could say all things about her, but something about her said, this lady has pain in her life. Verse 19, "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshiped on this mountain," Mount Ebal right there beside him, "but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is Jerusalem." So he's saying, you're right. I have issues in my life. And Jesus is able to look past the problems and see a need in this person's life. He was able to see all these issues, but he's able to go right to the heart of it, and he had a conversation with her that was full of compassion and kindness. And we need to do the same. We need to look past the problems, and we need to see the need in people's lives. She had all these issues. She had some problems in her past, and she had all these husbands and these men in their lives. And again, maybe that's part of the reason why she was at the well by herself in the afternoon instead of the morning when everybody else was there. But we don't see Jesus condemning. We don't see Jesus certainly gossiping. Jesus never avoided, but he went right to her and began talking with her. He took the time to interact with her. And there's people in your neighborhood who have different lifestyles. Maybe they're socially not accepted as well as others. And they have a lot of pain in their life. Perhaps they've had rejection. Perhaps it's out of their own bad choices that they've got to that place. Or maybe they've been a victim of other circumstances that brought them to the place where they're at. But she's by herself, and there's people in your neighborhood that are by themselves. And maybe they're reacting out of it in a mean-spirited way. And one of the things, comments that, encouragement that Nokomis gave you last week was enter into the pain of your neighbors. See the heartache that's there. But look past the problems to see a need in their life. She was concerned about where you should worship. And maybe there's people who worship differently, or they don't worship the same way that you do, or they don't have any faith at all. And how can you enter into their life, and instead of just giving them a sermon or giving them an argument, but how can you work with them to let them see Jesus in your life? Perhaps the people around you, they've got some issues with poverty and some heartache and difficulty. Maybe they got some physical ailments, some separation. How is it you can reach out to them? At the last service, one of the members of our church came up and said he went to a thing with his work for inclusion, was a seminar on how to reach out to others. He said all these people are there saying, how do we reach out to people who are different from us? And he said he looked over and there was a man in a wheelchair all by himself, and a man with difficulties that he had to, in order to communicate, he had to press buttons or type out on the screen and communicate with him. Communication was very hard for him. But he said, here it is in this whole seminar on inclusion, how to learn to do it. Here was a man sitting all by himself and separate from the others. And there's people in your neighborhood, there's people around because of circumstances in their life that are separate and need to know that they are of value. Jesus did that. Jesus spoke into this lady's life. And we see that he gave value to her. We used to do some hiking, Gene and I did, in the Rocky Mountains, and we would love that. We would go and take our supplies for the week, and we'd hike up and we'd stay up in the mountains for a whole week and just get away, and several people from here went with us, and we had a great time doing that. When you get up in those mountains, there were some creatures were up there, critters around, and there were some mountain goats that were there. We never got close to those mountain goats, and I am told that you don't want to get close to those mountain goats. They never travel in packs, they're scattered around, and they're very, very territorial. And they're kind of prickly, they're kind of mean-spirited. If you got close to them and invade them, they would kind of ram on you, get stuff to you, so you stayed away from them. But I think there's domestic goats that are so easy to be around. Mountain goats are different. Because of their circumstances, because of their lifestyle, they're there to survive. And if someone encroaches in their territory, they fight for survival. And there's some people that are like that. There's some people that are prickly. Some people that are fighters, people that are difficult. They're protecting, and they're protecting their turf, and they've been hurt, they've been separated around, and those are difficult people sometimes to be around. But they are the people that Jesus died for, and Jesus loves, and they need someone to speak into their life. Something else we see about Jesus, he was able to look for the opportunity and have a conversation of peace. The word for peace in the Bible is shalom. So Jesus, when he went to people, he had these conversations. He reached out to them, and as followers of Jesus, we need to do the same thing. We need to look for opportunities to have conversations, to connect, to engage, to get along with people. Jesus took the time to stop. His followers were hungry. They went into town to get something to eat, but he just stopped. He knew this lady was coming by. He went out of his way, and he had time for a conversation. Now, I'm busy, you're busy, we're rushing around, but can you just pause once in a while to see that someone's lonely, see someone has some issues, pain in their life, and reach out to them? And he was able to look for the opportunities to have a conversation and connect. He was able to find a common ground. One of our friends in Indonesia, his name is Martono, and he's been here at Harvester before. Martono is this great young man who loves Jesus. He has a passion for winning people of a different faith to Jesus who don't know him at all. And sometimes there's a great deal of animosity for people that believe very differently than you, but he says he just prays for opportunities for conversation and friendship. So he looks for people of peace, people that he can enter into their life and he can speak peace into their life. And he said he has to come from a lot of conversations, talking to someone who's very different, that worships totally different, maybe is angry, has issues in their life. And he says, but you can build bridges of friendship when you come through peace into people's life. He's able to speak that peace into their life and build that relationships and then earn the right to be able to share his faith with them. And this young man has been able to win many Muslims to Jesus because he speaks peace to them. Think how Jesus did with this lady. She asked him a very pointed question about where do you worship and how do you worship. He just kind of spoke to the heart of it. He didn't go on the argument level. He didn't weigh out let me give you all the reasons why and how you're wrong and what you should do differently in your life. He just spoke peace to her. Now, I love that word, shalom. It's a greeting of saying, I care about you and I wish God's peace in your life. And when you speak to your neighbor, when you say hi, or when you have those thoughts, are you wishing God's peace on their life? It's one of those words that you just don't say hi and walk on. When you say shalom, you have to demonstrate that you're speaking peace into their life and you desire peace for them. Do you look for the opportunity to have a conversation about what truly matters in life, who they are, and ultimately be able to tell them about who Jesus is in your life and give blessings and hope in who he is? 17th century in France, there was a man named Muridas. Muridas was an intelligent man who was schooled in many ways, but he went through a very difficult period of his life, and it says he lost everything that he had, and he was poverty-stricken. He became very weak. He was taken to some doctors, and thinking that he did not understand him, they were speaking in Latin, and they said, here is a poor, wretched man that we could do some experiments on. Understanding them, he began to speak back to them in Latin. And he says, how could you call me wretched and outcast when I am one that Jesus died for? And sometimes we look at other people and we think, oh, look at their problems. They're a Lady Fairchild. They've got so many issues. And we just stay away from, we walk away from where Jesus would just walk right up to that person and find the opportunity to have a conversation. Instead of going to arguments, we speak shalom and peace to them. And you are a follower of Jesus. It means you need to be demonstrating that peace the same way that he does. Perhaps God puts you in the neighborhood that you are because of that difficult person close by. That you are the person to bring peace to them. Perhaps your locker is where it is because of the people around you that they need to see Jesus. And you're the person to bring peace to them. Or the people in your cubicle, people that you wish would get transferred or you'd get transferred away, are the very people that Jesus wants you to be around. Not to be argumentative, not to fight, not to undermine, not to undercut, but to speak his peace to them. Matthew 5:9. Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God." Are you a peacemaker? In your neighborhood, are you one that speaks peace to others? When others are riled up and angry and fighting, are you the one who brings peace? Colossians 4:5-6 says, "Be wise in the way you act toward outsiders. People are different from you. Make the most of every opportunity." Look at this. "Let your conversations be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone." Are your conversations one that gives grace and demonstrates God's peace to them? Proverbs 25:11 says, "A word aptly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver," saying the right thing at the right time. Now, we don't always do that, but is that your desire? Are you one that just blurts out your words, you're cynical, you're edgy, you just say what it is, and you take pride in the fact that I just say it like it is? If you do, then that's not following Jesus as he asked you to. But words that bring peace and hope. We need to pray that we have the right words at the right time and that we have the right eyes that can see people the way he does. And I want you to do this. I want you to pray for divine appointments to share God's love, concern, and peace this week. Pray that God's going to give you an opportunity this week not to win the argument, not to get them converted to Christianity and change their whole life in a moment's time, but you're going to have the opportunity to speak peace into someone's life, to speak love, to demonstrate God's concern for them. It can be done very simply, but but it's done intentionally, looking for the opportunity. Andy Stanley says we need to look for the triggers. Look for those times in people's lives when they're hurting, when there's pain in their life, when there's change, when there's need, and they're just uncomfortable. They're not sure what's going on, that you can come in and speak shalom into their life. And just use your story. Not your list of arguments, but just be able to say, there's a time in my life when this and what Jesus has done for me. I like this quote from Mr. Rogers. He says, I believe that appreciation is a holy thing, that when we look for what's best in a person we happen to be with at the moment, we're doing what God does all the time. So in loving and appreciating our neighbor, we're participating in something special. So it's being who you're with at this moment. This is the conversation you're in. Are you giving them God's grace? And realize that God is working through you, through this divine appointment where you may be at. The difficult person in your neighborhood, with the pain, the heartache that's there, that God cares for them. Acts 1:8, Jesus said, you will be my witnesses. How are you doing in your neighborhood? Do you look like a witness of Jesus in your demeanor, in your words, in your attitude? Think what Jesus did. He came into the neighborhood. He spoke peace. He connected. He engaged with someone that was very difficult, someone who was an outsider, someone that was argumentative, but he just spoke peace into him. And this week, can you look for the opportunity to say, I care about you, and God cares about you? To be able to get to that place where you've spoken peace, you've got the conversation going, and there's an issue or difficulty in your life, maybe the next step would just be to say, hey, can I pray about that this week for you? Would you be okay if I prayed for you? Most people would say yes. They might ask you to pray for them right then, but just to speak in there to say, I believe God wants to speak into your life. That's an easy thing to do. Say, can I pray for you this week? And then you remember to do it. In that short little phrase, you're letting them know that I believe Jesus has the power to make a difference in your life. And you're speaking peace to them. Colossians 3:15 is a verse that says, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. Is the peace of Jesus ruling in your heart? That comes when we surrender your life to Jesus. Some of you have been followers for a long time, but if you're honest, there's not a whole lot of peace. There's a lot of turmoil in your life. Saying whatever the circumstances, we have the peace of Christ, and you need to understand and accept that peace in your life so you can give that peace to other people around you and reach out to them when they're hurting. I love a blessing in the Old Testament. It's called the rabbinical blessing, and we've used it different times. And look at this, how it's a blessing to be prayed over for people. So receive this from God for you, where you're at. Numbers 6, verse 24. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. Wouldn't that be wonderful if we could just see that? That God's face is shining on you. He desires to give you peace. He wants to work in your life. The Lord bless you. Wouldn't you love to be in the Lord's blessings around you? That's God's desire for your life, but it's something you got to decide to receive. And each person today, I want you to receive this blessing of peace from God. And you receive that blessing of peace, whatever turmoil is in your life, say, God's blessings are over me, God's with me. And then you take that blessing of peace and grace given to you, and you give it to your neighbor. Think about your words you've given this last week. Maybe they were angry, upset, frustrated. If Jesus were to enter in the moment at that time with that person, what kind of words would he share with the person who's argumentative, who's different, who's odd? I think he'd speak peace to them. So I wonder if we take this same phrase, the same blessing that we love God speaking over us, and if we would take this blessing and we would speak it over our neighbors. Do you desire that God would bless your neighbor? Do you desire that God would make his face shine upon them? And I appreciate right before the service, a lady here in the church who we've been praying for, her friend who's been through a very painful, hard, difficult time of grief, who was very far from God. She came up and she said, guess what, Doyle? She is now seeking God. In fact, she wasn't seeking to begin with, but God, her words were, God got a hold of her and has changed her life. And that happens when you pray for the people around you and you desire for that life. But so you pray that God will make his face shine upon them, that God will get a hold of them and they will see that. And that God would be gracious to them. How will they know that God's gracious to them? They'll know that when you are gracious to them. And the Lord turns his face towards you and give you peace. So I'm going to ask if you'd read this verse with me. If you'd read it and understand that this is a prayer I want to pray for a neighbor. So think of a neighbor. Think of a neighbor who doesn't know the peace of God. It's difficulty. And would you read this with me as a prayer for your neighbor now? The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. Would you think of that same person and just take a moment and pray for them right now? And would you have the courage to pray that God will give you the opportunity this week for a divine appointment to speak peace into their life? Would you pray that God will give you the right heart and the right words at the right time to demonstrate shalom to them? Would you ask God to change your heart that you would see them as people instead of their problems, that you would see their needs instead of the differences, that you could love them? Father, I thank you that Jesus is one who can see the heart of people. Thank you for how he reached out to this lady in her pain and difficulty. And as she said when she walked away, he changed everything in her life as a result. And Father, I pray that in this room, your Spirit would move and remind us of your hope and your blessings and your grace and your love that you have for each one of us. For the person in the room who is struggling because of heartache in life, Father, I pray that you would bless them and give them peace today. Forgive us when we've been angry and fighting and mean in spirit. Father, help us to surrender to you today. Open our eyes to opportunities to follow you. It's in the name of Jesus we pray.